I begged my husband to come support me during chemo. When he finally did, he brought a woman I'd never seen before. This is my new girlfriend. She'll be taking over when you're gone. The treatment room went silent as 12 patients whipped their heads around. Brooke has been incredible at supporting me through this hard time for us, he said. The woman wearing my missing Christmas earrings smiled. Peter's told me so much about you. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The nurse found her voice first. Sir, this is a treatment room. Family only. But Brooke is family. He squeezed her hand. Or will be. Soon. When the inevitable finally happens. He checked his watch. We can't stay. Brooke has a showing at 2. Just wanted you two to meet. They left before I could form words. Before I could ask why. That night, alone in our bed while Peter was working late, everything clicked. It wasn't just an affair. You see, Brooke was the realtor from his office that he'd mentioned months ago. Her husband was deployed overseas, and Brooke was looking for an apartment for when her husband came back. Peter started staying late, the same month she started going to viewings. And as soon as I got diagnosed, Peter started asking me for money. Suddenly, his cousin's kids had cancer and needed $2,000 per month. He knew I'd recently inherited money. So right after chemo, when I was too exhausted to even think, he'd hand me the withdrawal slips to sign. I put everything together and came to the conclusion that $2,000 was their rent money. Peter and Brooke had moved in together the day I got diagnosed. 2 days later, I was back in the treatment chair when a man in an ironed suit arrived. Brooke Mitchell? He asked coldly. That's me. He put a stack of papers into my hand. Your husband is petitioning for your medical power of attorney. I'm here on his behalf. I looked down at the papers. He's claiming my brain is too damaged to make my own medical decisions. My voice cracked. You know he'll stop my treatment and let me die? Why are you helping him? I asked, tears filling my eyes. The lawyer just shrugged. Just business, I guess. That's when my phone rang. It was Peter. What are you doing? My voice coming out through choked sobs. You and Brooke? You're dying anyway. He cut me off. His tone was patient, like he was explaining basic math to a child. I just want me and you to both suffer less. But I'm responding to treatment, I said while crying. Doctors say my numbers are... Doctors just say that to keep you paying them for longer. Anyways, you should be grateful I haven't abandoned you completely. This is harder on me, you know, watching you deteriorate. I could hear traffic. He was driving. At least you get to rest soon. I have to live with this trauma forever. If you really loved me, you'd see how much I need Brooke's support right now. He was actually positioning himself as the victim. Peter, the lawyers say this is all standard. Don't make this difficult. The line went dead. I was still sobbing when his lawyer, who'd heard everything, told me I had 72 hours to sign it before my husband takes drastic action. The entire treatment room stared at me as he walked away. Some faces had pity, some pure shock. That's when I decided to give my husband what he wants. He got his papers back exactly 72 hours later. He got medical power of attorney, exactly what he wanted. Except there was one thing. The power of attorney was for dental decisions only. And since my teeth weren't getting treated, this was practically worthless. But the best part was I'd mailed it directly to his office, specifically during his partner meeting. I even taped a penny to his envelope, writing, "Buy Brooke something nice," on the front. He had to sit there in front of all his superiors and explain why he wants medical power of attorney over his wife, and why there were hints of an affair between him and an intern. That evening, I got 17 missed calls, but I didn't answer a single one. I was on the attack now. I opened my laptop and started digging. I found out he'd stolen $48,200. I logged into his social media and found his texts to his brother. How long before I can date publicly without looking bad? His Google searches, stage 3 breast cancer life expectancy. I even found out that he'd tried to raise my life insurance 3 separate times, all denied attempts in the last 8 months. All while his social media showed him at cancer support groups, wearing pink t-shirts and donating the money he stole from me to cancer research. My lawyer was in the middle of drafting up divorce papers when the letter came in. I was actually being summoned to court. Peter was petitioning to be given control of all my finances, as if he hadn't stolen enough. When the day of court arrived and I walked in, I noticed a scar on Peter that was never there before. Trial started, and Brooke instantly got on the stand. She sat with her hands folded, practiced concern, and tears plastered all over her face. I've been close with the family for 2 years now, she started. Kelly used to be vibrant. She made eye contact with me. But now she's changed. Just last week, she threw her medicine in the trash. Peter, she started and cut herself off with a choked sob. Peter has a scar on his neck from when she threw boiling water at him. The entire courtroom gasped. Peter lifted his collar, his own tears forming while he touched the scar. It's true, Your Honor, he added. Even the judge looked disgusted. By the time Brooke was done, they believed they'd won. They didn't realize that chemo wasn't killing just the cancer. It was also killing every part of me that loved Peter. So when I got on the stand, they had no idea what was coming. I took a slow breath and looked straight at the judge. My hands were steady as I opened the folder in front of me. Peter and I were happy until my diagnosis, I explained, keeping my voice calm and clear. Then everything changed overnight when he suddenly needed money for his cousin's sick kids. I pulled out the first document, a stack of bank statements highlighted in yellow. The withdrawals started the exact week I got diagnosed, I said, pointing to the dates. $2,000 every single month. The judge leaned forward in her seat, squinting at the numbers. I watched her eyes move across the page, following the pattern I'd marked. Peter shifted in his chair. I slid the next document across to the clerk who handed it to the judge. "This is a lease agreement I found in Peter's email," I said. "He and Brooke signed it 2 days after my diagnosis. The rent is exactly $2,000 per month, the same amount he told me his cousin needed for cancer treatment." The judge's eyebrows went up as she read. Peter's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. Across the room, Brooke was staring at her hands, her face going red. She shifted in her seat like she wanted to disappear. I pulled out the next packet, my heart beating faster but my voice staying level. "This is Peter's Google search history from our shared cloud account," I explained. "I accessed it before he locked me out." The judge took the papers and started reading. Her face changed as she went down the list. Stage 3 breast cancer survival rate. How long does chemo take to kill someone? Life insurance payout timeline. The courtroom went completely silent. Someone in the back row gasped loud enough that everyone heard it. Peter's face had gone pale, almost gray. I kept going. "Next, I have 3 life insurance applications," I said, laying them out one by one. Peter tried to increase my coverage from $100,000 to $500,000. All 3 attempts happened in the months after my diagnosis. All 3 were denied because the insurance companies flagged them as suspicious. I paused and looked at Peter. "He never told me about any of these attempts," I said. The judge was writing notes now, her pen moving fast across her notepad. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the courtroom display screen. "These are text messages between Peter and his brother," I said. The messages filled the screen and I read them out loud. "How long before I can date publicly without looking bad? The treatment is expensive but worth it for the payout." His brother's responses showed they were planning for my death, discussing how to manage appearances afterward. Peter's face went from pale to completely white. His hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. I switched to the next set of images on the screen. "These are photos from Peter's social media," I explained. "Cancer support groups, pink ribbons, donation checks made out to cancer research." The judge nodded, looking at the images. Then I pulled up the bank records next to them. "Every single one of those checks was written from my inheritance account," I said. "Without my knowledge, without my permission. He was donating my grandmother's money to look like a devoted husband while he was stealing from me." The judge's expression had shifted from neutral to something harder, colder. I took another breath and continued. "Peter brought Brooke to my chemotherapy treatment," I said. "He introduced her as family, which violated the treatment room's family-only policy. I have a written statement from my nurse." I handed the statement to the clerk. It describes how inappropriate and cruel this was, especially given my vulnerable state during treatment. The judge read the nurse's statement, her jaw tightening. Her eyes moved to Peter and the look she gave him was pure anger. I presented the next folder, thicker than the others. "These are my medical records," I said. "They show my cancer is actually responding well to treatment. My cognitive function is completely normal." I opened to a specific page marked with a tab. "Dr. Figueroa's report states that I understand my diagnosis, treatment options, and prognosis perfectly, that I'm making informed decisions about my care. This directly contradicts Peter's claims that my brain is too damaged to make my own decisions." The judge took her time reading through the medical records, flipping pages carefully. I pulled out another document while she read. "This is the original medical power of attorney paperwork that Peter tried to get me to sign," I said. "It would have given him complete control over all my medical decisions. His lawyer told me I had 72 hours to sign or face drastic action." I looked at the judge. "That felt like a threat," I said quietly. Then I showed her the dental-only version I sent back. I explained I wanted to see what he would do when his plan failed. Several people in the courtroom made small sounds, shocked murmurs that rippled through the room. For my final piece of evidence, I pulled up emails on the screen. "These are from Peter's work account," I said. I accessed them before he changed all the passwords. The emails showed Peter and Brooke planning trips, discussing furniture for our place, talking about their future together. The dates ran throughout my entire treatment. "This proves the affair wasn't just emotional support," I said. "It was a full relationship." I scrolled to one specific email and read it out loud. "Just a few more months and we can stop hiding." That one was from Brooke. The judge sat back in her chair, looking from the screen to Peter to me. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I reached into my folder and pulled out a set of photos. "These are pictures of Peter's neck scar," I said while handing them to the clerk. "The ones Brooke just testified about." I watched the judge examine them closely. "Now here's my chemotherapy schedule from the hospital," I continued. "The date Peter claims I threw boiling water at him was October 15th. I pointed to the entry on my schedule. I was at a 6-hour infusion appointment that entire day. I arrived at 8 in the morning and didn't leave until after 3. My nurse signed a statement confirming I was there the whole time and that I left exhausted and went straight home to sleep." Peter's lawyer shifted in his seat. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen. "I hired a digital forensics expert to examine the scar photo that was submitted as evidence," I explained. "The metadata shows this photo was actually taken on September 22nd. I let that sink in for a moment. That's 3 weeks before the date Peter claims the incident happened. The expert confirmed the photo's original date and found evidence it had been edited." The judge leaned forward and looked directly at Peter's lawyer. "Counsel, can you explain this discrepancy?" His face went red and he opened his mouth but nothing came out. He looked at Peter, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, I was not aware of any issues with the photo's date," he finally managed. The judge's expression was cold. She made a note on her pad. I pulled out another document. This is a written statement from my sister Celine, I said. She describes how Peter contacted her 2 weeks ago and asked her to lie in court. He wanted her to say she witnessed me becoming violent and throwing things. Celine refused and told me about his request immediately. That's when I realized how far Peter was willing to go with these false accusations. The statement includes the exact conversation where Peter tried to coach her on what to say. Someone in the back of the courtroom gasped. Brooke was staring at her hands. I opened another folder. These are credit card statements from Peter's personal card, I said. The one he told me he only used for work expenses. I pointed to specific charges highlighted in yellow. Here's a weekend trip to a resort that cost $3,000. The dates match exactly with when Peter told me he was at a work conference. I scrolled through more charges on the screen. Expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, all while Peter was telling me we needed to cut costs because of my medical bills. I looked at the judge. That weekend trip happened while I was recovering from a particularly brutal chemo session. I could barely get out of bed. I presented my next set of documents. These are the fake charity documents Peter created for his supposed cousin's kids with cancer, I explained. Made up names, a fabricated GoFundMe page, the whole thing. My forensic accountant traced every dollar. The money went directly into a joint account that Peter shares with Brooke. I pulled up the bank records on screen. There are no sick cousins, no kids with cancer, just an elaborate lie to steal my inheritance money. Peter was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the screen. I have text messages from friends, I said. Messages where they tell me they wanted to visit. But Peter said I was too sick for company. I scrolled through them slowly. Here's one from my best friend from college saying she tried to visit 3 times, but Peter turned her away at the door. Here's another from my cousin who Peter told I didn't want any visitors. I looked at the judge. I desperately wanted support during treatment. Peter isolated me from everyone who could have helped me or noticed what he was doing. This made it easier for him to control information and steal from me. I opened another file on my laptop. These are calendar entries from Peter's private calendar, I said. The one he thought I couldn't access. I pointed to entries starting 1 week after my diagnosis. Appointments with divorce attorneys. The notes say things like discuss asset protection and timeline for filing. I scrolled through more entries. He was planning to leave me from the very beginning, but he decided stealing from me first would be more profitable. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of the judge writing notes. I clicked to open a video file. Tucker from the hospital patient advocacy office helped me obtain this security footage, I explained. It shows the parking lot outside the treatment center. The timestamp shows the date Peter and Brooke came to my treatment room. I let the video play. Peter and Brooke walked into frame, laughing. They stopped by Peter's car and kissed. Not a quick peck, but a long kiss. Then they stood there talking and smiling before walking toward the building. The timestamp proves they planned this whole thing. This wasn't a supportive visit. It was a calculated move to humiliate me in front of other patients. Several people in the courtroom made disgusted sounds. I pulled up emails on the screen. These are from Peter's work account, I said. Emails between him and Brooke discussing my deteriorating condition. I read one out loud. The doctors are too optimistic. We need to take control of the situation ourselves. That's from Peter to Brooke, dated 3 weeks ago. I scrolled to another. How much longer do we have to wait? That's from Brooke. These emails make it clear they were hoping for my death and frustrated that treatment was working. I reached for my final folder. This is my medical journal, I said. I've kept detailed notes throughout my entire treatment. Symptoms, medications, side effects, doctor appointments, treatment responses. Every single entry is clear and organized. I handed the journal to the judge. Dr. Figueroa reviewed it and wrote a letter stating it demonstrates exceptional patient engagement and cognitive function. The judge took her time looking through the pages. I sat back in my chair and waited. Peter's lawyer was whispering urgently to him, but Peter just stared straight ahead. Brooke had tears running down her face, but nobody seemed to care. I reached for my next folder and pulled out a letter from Dr. Figueroa. Peter tried to convince my oncologist to stop my treatment, I explained. He told her I wanted to do natural remedies instead of chemo. Dr. Figueroa's statement says I never expressed any interest in stopping treatment. She refused his request and wrote notes in my medical file about his interference. The judge took the letter and read it carefully while Peter shifted in his seat. I opened my phone and connected it to the courtroom screen. This is a recording I made of Peter's phone call, I said. The one where he told me I was dying anyway. I started recording our conversations after he threatened me with the medical power of attorney because I knew I needed proof. I pressed play, and Peter's voice filled the courtroom. You're dying anyway, his recorded voice said. I just want me and you to both suffer less. The recording continued with him positioning himself as the victim and saying how hard this was for him. The judge listened to the full 2 minutes without moving. Her expression got darker as the recording played. Several people in the gallery made disgusted sounds when Peter's voice said he needed Brooke's support. I pulled up bank statements on the screen next. Peter emptied our joint savings account 2 days after I sent him the dental POA, I explained. He took $15,000 in retaliation. My attorney filed an emergency motion to freeze the accounts, but he'd already moved the money to an account with only his name on it. This proves he was willing to leave me without any resources during cancer treatment. The judge wrote more notes while I scrolled through the bank records showing the withdrawals. I switched to my text message screenshots. These are messages Peter sent to our mutual friends, I said. He told them I was losing my mind and becoming paranoid and violent. He sent these messages before I could tell anyone what he was doing. Several friends have given statements saying they now realize he was trying to turn everyone against me. I read one message out loud where Peter told his friend I threw things at him and screamed for no reason. None of it was true, but he was building a story to make people think I was unstable. I pulled up a real estate website on the screen. "This is the apartment Peter and Brooke share," I said. Brooke listed it on her own company website. The listing photos show Peter's belongings throughout the apartment. I zoomed in on one photo showing a watch I gave Peter for our anniversary sitting on the nightstand. Another photo showed his favorite chair from our house in their living room. This proves they're not just having an affair, but actually living together as a couple. Brooke's face went completely white as I showed each photo. I opened a document showing our account passwords. "Peter changed every shared password we had the day after I sent the dental POA," I explained. "He locked me out of my own email, cloud storage, and online accounts I'd used for years. He was trying to prevent me from gathering more evidence against him. Fortunately, I'd already downloaded everything I needed before he could stop me." The list showed dozens of accounts where the passwords had been changed on the same day. I held up my grandmother's will next. "This inheritance documentation proves the $48,200 Peter stole was money my grandmother left specifically for my future," I said. "The will states this money is for Kelly's security and dreams. Peter knew how much this inheritance meant to me. He didn't just steal money, but my grandmother's final gift to me." I had to stop talking for a second because my voice cracked. The judge looked at the will and then at Peter with clear anger on her face. I opened a folder of witness statements. "These are from my chemotherapy nurses," I explained. "They describe me as alert, engaged, and making informed decisions about my care. They say Peter's visits were disruptive and his behavior was controlling. Multiple nurses wrote about times Peter tried to speak for me when doctors asked me direct questions. One nurse specifically wrote that she was concerned for my safety and autonomy." The judge read through each statement while Peter's lawyer whispered urgently to him. I pulled up emails on the screen showing Peter's internet searches. These emails show Peter researching financial power of attorney and conservatorship. "In the weeks right after my diagnosis," I said. "He was planning this scheme from the very beginning. He was looking for legal ways to control my money and medical decisions before I even started treatment." One email to a lawyer specifically asks how to prove someone is mentally incompetent. The courtroom went completely silent as people read the emails on the screen. I opened my final piece of evidence for this section. "This is the visitor log from the treatment center," I explained. It shows Peter came to every single appointment in the first month after my diagnosis. Then his visits dropped off dramatically as my treatment started working and I began improving. He came less and less as it became clear I was responding well to chemo. This completely contradicts his claims of being a devoted caregiver who's suffering through my illness. The log showed exact dates and times proving Peter stopped visiting once it was clear I might survive. I pulled out another folder and opened it to show the bank manager's statement. I explained how Peter went to our bank 3 weeks after my diagnosis and told them I was mentally unfit to manage my own accounts. He asked them to give him sole control over everything, including my inheritance money. The bank manager refused because I'd been in just 2 days before, handling my own business perfectly fine, and she thought his request was suspicious. She filed a report with Adult Protective Services about possible elder abuse, even though I'm only 34 years old. The statement described Peter as aggressive and demanding, insisting I was too sick to think clearly. The judge read the statement carefully while Peter's lawyer flipped through papers looking for something to object to. I held up my next document, a thick packet of test results. "These are my cognitive assessment results from last month," I said. Tucker helped me arrange testing through the hospital after Peter started claiming brain damage. The neuropsychological evaluation tested my memory, reasoning, problem-solving, and decision-making abilities. Every single score came back in the normal to above-average range. There is zero evidence of any brain damage or cognitive problems. The psychologist who tested me wrote that I demonstrated excellent mental capacity and full understanding of my medical and financial situation. I watched Peter's face go red as the judge examined each page of test results. I opened my laptop and turned it toward the judge to show social media screenshots. "These are posts from Brooke's accounts," I explained. She called Peter my Peter in the captions and posted photos of their apartment with romantic messages. She tagged the location and wrote things like, "Home sweet home with my love," and "building our future together." She deleted all these posts right after I sent the dental power of attorney to Peter's office, but I'd already taken screenshots of everything. The posts are dated throughout my entire treatment, starting just days after my diagnosis. This wasn't something that developed recently like they want everyone to believe. One post from 2 months ago shows Peter cooking in their kitchen with the caption, "My man takes such good care of me." I presented the timeline that Valerie helped me create, a large poster board with dates, events, and connections mapped out in different colors. "This shows every major action Peter took against me," I said, "and when each one happened. The pattern is clear. Every time I had good news from my doctors, Peter escalated his attempts to control me. When my tumor markers improved in July, he tried to increase my life insurance that same week. When I responded well to my 3rd chemo session in August, he filed for medical power of attorney 3 days later. When my scans showed the cancer was shrinking in September, he went to the bank claiming I was mentally unfit. He got more desperate every time it looked like I might actually survive. The judge studied the timeline for several minutes, tracing the connections with her finger. I held up a stack of handwritten statements from my neighbors. These are from the people who live on my street, I explained. 3 different neighbors saw Peter moving belongings out of our house in the middle of the night during my first month of treatment. They saw him loading furniture, boxes, and personal items into a truck at 2 in the morning. One neighbor almost called the police because they thought we were being robbed. Peter was literally emptying our home while I was too sick from chemo to notice what was happening. He took the couch my grandmother gave us, the TV we bought together, even kitchen appliances. My neighbor, Mrs. Gray, wrote that she saw him make 4 trips over 2 weeks, always late at night when he thought no one was watching. I opened another document from my medical file. Peter tried to get Dr. Figueroa to prescribe me anti-anxiety medication and sleeping pills, I said. He called her office claiming I was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep, that I was becoming unstable and needed medication to calm down. Dr. Figueroa refused because when she examined me, I showed no signs of anxiety disorders or insomnia. She suspected he wanted to make me appear mentally unstable to support his incompetence claims. She documented his request in my medical records as inappropriate and concerning. The doctor wrote that Peter's behavior raised red flags about his motives and his respect for my autonomy. I showed the court a letter from my insurance company. This is about Peter's attempt to list me as disabled on insurance paperwork without my knowledge, I explained. He filled out forms claiming I was unable to work or manage my own affairs due to my cancer treatment. The insurance company has a policy of contacting patients directly to verify disability claims, which is how I found out what he was doing. I told them I'm not disabled and I'm managing my own affairs just fine. They sent me this letter confirming they rejected his claim and noted my statement that the paperwork was filed without my consent or knowledge. I pulled up emails on the screen and several people in the courtroom leaned forward to read them. These are messages between Peter and Brooke discussing how to handle me if I became difficult about the medical power of attorney, I said. They talked about different strategies, including threatening to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. One email from Peter says, "If she fights this, we'll have to claim she's a danger to herself." Brooke replied, suggesting they document any erratic behavior to build a case. Another email discusses getting me declared incompetent through the courts if I refuse to sign over control. Reading these emails out loud made several people in the courtroom look visibly upset, and one woman in the back shook her head in disgust. I presented my employment records next, showing my work schedule and performance reviews. I've been working part-time throughout my entire treatment, I explained. I manage projects, meet deadlines, and communicate with clients and coworkers. My boss provided a statement calling me reliable, professional, and fully capable. She wrote that my work quality never declined even during treatment, and that I always informed her in advance when I needed time off for appointments. This directly contradicts Peter's claims that I'm too impaired to function or make decisions. If I can manage a job and professional responsibilities during chemotherapy, I can certainly manage my own medical and financial affairs. I held up my final piece of evidence for this section, consultation notes from 3 different divorce attorneys. Valerie subpoenaed these records, I said, and they show Peter met with divorce lawyers starting 1 week after my diagnosis. The notes document what Peter asked about in each consultation. He wanted to know about hiding assets so I couldn't access them in a divorce. He asked about minimizing spousal support payments. He specifically asked whether a terminal illness diagnosis affected divorce settlements, and if he'd be required to pay my medical bills if we separated. These notes prove he was planning his exit strategy from the very beginning while pretending to support me through cancer treatment. One attorney wrote that Peter seemed more concerned about protecting his money than about his sick wife, and that made her uncomfortable enough to decline to represent him. I pulled out my next folder and opened it to show the family isolation evidence. I explained how Peter told my parents and my sister that I didn't want visitors because stress was bad for my treatment. My mom's written statement said she respected what she thought were my wishes and stayed away even though it broke her heart. My dad wrote that he called Peter every week asking to visit, and Peter always said I was too tired or too sick. My sister Celine provided the longest statement describing how Peter told her I specifically asked not to see her because we'd had a fight, which was completely made up. She believed him for 3 months until she finally showed up at my apartment anyway, and found me alone, weak from chemo and desperate for company. That's when she realized Peter had been lying to everyone. I watched several people in the courtroom shake their heads as I read these statements out loud. Peter had cut me off from the people who loved me most during the hardest time of my life. I moved to my financial records next and spread them across the evidence table. I explained that I've been managing my own money throughout my entire treatment, and these records prove it. My bank statements show I pay my rent on time every month, I pay my utilities, I manage my medical bills and insurance claims. My credit score is 780, which is excellent, and I've never missed a single payment on anything. I successfully managed my grandmother's inheritance money and made smart decisions about where to keep it and how to use it until Peter started stealing from it. Every transaction is documented, every bill is paid, every financial choice I made was sound and responsible. This demonstrates exactly the kind of mental capacity Peter claims I don't have. If I can manage complex financial decisions during chemotherapy, I can certainly handle my own affairs. The judge leaned forward to look at my credit report and bank statements while I explained each document. I pulled out the hospital incident report that Tucker helped me get and held it up for the court. This is the official documentation from the day Peter brought Brooke to my chemotherapy treatment. The report describes their visit as disruptive and inappropriate given the treatment room's family-only policy. It notes that I was visibly upset and distressed after they left. The nurse who filed the report wrote that Peter showed concerning disregard for my well-being, and that bringing his girlfriend to meet me during chemo was cruel and unusual. The report also documents that other patients complained about the disruption, and that security had to be notified. Tucker's signature is on the report as the patient advocate who reviewed the incident. I explained that this report proves Peter's pattern of using my vulnerable moments to hurt and control me. I picked up my phone and pulled up the text messages I'd saved between Peter and Brooke. I read them out loud for the court. Peter wrote to Brooke 2 weeks ago saying I'd be gone soon and they could finally start their real life together. Brooke replied asking if he thought it would be much longer. Peter said the doctors were too optimistic, but nature would take its course. Another message from last week shows Peter telling Brooke that the sooner this is over, the sooner we're free. He wrote that he's tired of pretending to care and just wants to move on with his life. I watched Brooke's face go pale as I read these messages. She hadn't realized I had access to Peter's texts. The judge asked to see my phone and I handed it over, so she could verify the messages were real. I explained my documentation process next and why I started keeping such detailed records. After the treatment room incident when Peter introduced Brooke, I knew he was dangerous and I needed proof of everything. I've kept copies of every document, every bank statement, every medical record. I recorded phone conversations when it was legal to do so in our state. I took screenshots of texts and emails before Peter could delete them. I built this entire case with help from Valerie, who guided me on what evidence would matter in court. I organized everything by date and category so nothing would be lost or confused. This level of planning and organization demonstrates the exact kind of mental clarity and capacity that Peter claims I lack. If my brain was really too damaged to make decisions, I couldn't have assembled this comprehensive case against him. I held up my final piece of evidence and told the court this was the most important thing they'd hear today. I pulled out a small recording device and explained that I recorded a conversation between Peter and his brother 3 weeks ago. I pressed play, and Peter's voice filled the courtroom. He told his brother he's counting down the days until I die, and they discussed how he'd spend the life insurance money. His brother asked if he felt guilty about any of this. Peter laughed and said, "I'm dying anyway, so he might as well benefit from it." He said the cancer is doing his work for him and all he has to do is wait. The recording played for 2 full minutes, and the courtroom went completely silent. Several people looked shocked and disgusted. The judge's expression turned hard and angry as she listened. When the recording ended, I turned it off and set it on the evidence table. Nobody said anything for several long seconds. I looked directly at the judge and told her I'm fighting for my life in 2 ways right now. I'm fighting cancer with chemotherapy and medical treatment. And I'm fighting my husband who wants me to die so he can take my money and be with his girlfriend. I explained that I need the court's protection to make sure I can continue my treatment without Peter interfering or stealing more of my resources. I asked for an emergency protective order to keep him away from me and my medical facilities. I asked for immediate separation of all our finances, so he can't take anything else. I asked for a criminal investigation into his theft and fraud. I told the judge that Peter has already stolen over $48,000 from me and tried to gain control of my medical decisions, so he could stop my treatment. I need the court to protect me so I can focus on surviving cancer instead of fighting off my husband. The judge nodded slowly and made notes while I spoke. She announced a short recess to review all the evidence I'd presented. I stepped down from the witness stand and sat next to Valerie at our table. My hands were shaking and I felt completely drained from reliving everything. Valerie squeezed my shoulder and whispered that I did an amazing job. Across the courtroom, Peter and his lawyer Julian were having a heated whispered conversation. Peter kept gesturing angrily while Julian shook his head and looked through his papers. Brooke sat alone 3 rows back looking pale and scared. She kept glancing at the door like she wanted to run. The 15-minute recess felt like hours. When the judge returned, her expression was stern and focused. She sat down and looked directly at Peter before speaking. She denied his petition for financial control immediately. Her voice was firm as she stated that I've demonstrated exceptional mental capacity, and that Peter's claims are not only unsupported but contradicted by overwhelming evidence. She said the evidence shows Peter has been systematically stealing from me, lying to my family and attempting to interfere with my medical care. She ordered an immediate freeze on all our joint accounts. She required Peter to provide a full accounting of every penny he's withdrawn from our accounts in the past year. She said if he can't account for the money, she'll assume it was stolen. Peter's face went from pale white to bright red as she spoke. His lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up her hand for silence. She continued by granting me an emergency protective order. Peter has to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. He can't come to my home, my medical facilities, or anywhere I'm receiving treatment. If he violates this order even once, he'll be arrested immediately. She ordered him to return my grandmother's inheritance money, all $48,000, within 30 days or face contempt of court charges. She also ordered Peter to pay all my legal fees because his frivolous and malicious petition caused me unnecessary expense during a serious health crisis. The judge's final words were that she's referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. She specifically mentioned fraud, theft, forgery, and possible attempted harm given Peter's interference with my medical care. She said Peter's actions constitute financial abuse of a vulnerable person. 2 police officers who'd been standing at the back of the courtroom started walking toward Peter's table as the judge finished speaking. The judge wasn't done. She looked down at her papers and then back up at Peter with an expression that made the whole room go quiet. She said she was referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. She listed off the charges she wanted them to look at. fraud, theft, forgery, and possible attempted murder based on Peter's interference with my medical care. Her exact words were that Peter's actions constitute financial abuse of a vulnerable person and possibly attempted manslaughter through medical neglect. The two officers who'd been walking toward Peter's table reached him just as she finished. One of them stood right behind his chair while the other positioned himself by the door. Peter's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. His lawyer Julian put a hand on his arm like he was trying to keep him from doing something stupid. The judge turned her attention to Brooke next. She looked right at her and said, "Brooke may face charges as an accomplice to fraud and theft." She ordered Brooke to preserve all financial records and communications with Peter. She also said Brooke couldn't leave the state. Brooke's practiced crying turned into real sobbing. She stood up and said she didn't know the full extent of what Peter was doing. The judge held up her hand and cut her off mid-sentence. She said ignorance isn't a legal defense and that Brooke should get herself a lawyer. The bailiff had to tell Brooke to sit back down. Everyone in the courtroom was staring at them now. Some people had their phones out like they wanted to record this. The judge gathered her papers and stood up. She told everyone court was adjourned and walked out through the door behind her bench. As soon as she left, the courtroom exploded with noise. People were talking and pointing. Peter tried to stand up, but the officer behind him put a hand on his shoulder and made him sit back down. Valerie grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the exit. We were almost to the door when Peter saw us leaving. He shook off the officer's hand and started walking toward me. He only made it 3 steps before both bailiffs blocked his path. One of them pointed at me and then back at Peter. He was reminding Peter about the protective order that was now in effect. Peter had to stay 500 feet away from me at all times. Peter's face twisted up and he started shouting. He said I was ruining his life. He said he was trying to help me. His voice got louder with each word. He said I was being ungrateful and that I'd regret this. But his words sounded hollow after everything the court just heard. Everyone had seen the evidence. Everyone knew what he'd done. Valerie kept pulling me toward the door while Peter kept shouting behind us. The bailiffs were trying to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. One of the officers who'd been standing by his table came over and said something to him quietly. Peter finally shut up, but he was breathing hard and his hands were shaking. We made it out into the hallway and Valerie walked fast toward the elevator. She kept looking back to make sure Peter wasn't following us. We could still hear him shouting even through the closed courtroom doors. The elevator took forever to arrive. When it finally did, we got in and Valerie pressed the button for the parking garage about 5 times. As the doors closed, I saw the officers leading Peter back into the courtroom. They were taking him to a side room for questioning. We drove to Valerie's office in silence. I was shaking and couldn't make it stop. My hands were trembling. So bad I had to sit on them. Valerie kept glancing over at me while she drove, but she didn't say anything. When we got to her office, she made me sit down and brought me water. She sat across from me and explained that the criminal investigation would take time. She said these cases usually take months to build properly. But she also said the evidence I gathered made prosecution very likely. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing notes. She said Peter could face 5 to 10 years in prison for the theft alone. Then there would be additional charges for the fraud and medical interference. Each charge carried its own sentence and they could stack up. While she was talking, her office phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and her eyes got wide. She answered it and said yes several times. Then she looked at me and mouthed, "DA's office." She listened for another minute and then said I was available tomorrow morning. She hung up and told me the district attorney's office wanted to meet with me. They were moving fast on this. They wanted to talk to me within the hour the next day. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Peter's face in the courtroom. The way he'd looked so confident when Brooke was testifying. The way that confidence had drained away as I presented my evidence. The way he'd looked when the officers approached him. The next morning, I met Valerie at the district attorney's office downtown. A detective named Hassan was waiting for us in a conference room. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. He shook my hand and said this was one of the most calculated cases of spousal abuse he'd seen in his career. He'd been working financial crimes for 20 years, and Peter's scheme was particularly cruel. He opened a folder that was already thick with papers. He said they were building charges for theft, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy with Brooke. He spread out some of the documents I'd provided and pointed to different sections. He said my documentation made their job much easier. Most victims don't have this kind of evidence. He asked if I was willing to testify, and I said yes immediately. I wanted to make sure Peter couldn't do this to anyone else. Hassan smiled for the first time and said that was exactly what he needed to hear. After the meeting with Hassan, Valerie drove me to my bank. The manager was waiting for us in his office. He'd already gotten the court order to unfreeze my personal accounts. He apologized for not catching the suspicious withdrawals earlier. He said the bank should have flagged them. He pulled up my accounts on his computer and showed me the new ones he'd created. These accounts had only my name on them. Peter couldn't access them or even see they existed. The manager said he was waiving all fees for the next year as an apology. He also said the bank was filing its own fraud report and cooperating fully with the criminal investigation. I signed about 20 different forms. My hand was cramping by the time we finished. But when I left the bank, I had control of my money again. From the bank, I drove to the hospital. Tucker met me in the patient advocate office. He had a stack of papers ready for me to sign. These were updated medical directives that explicitly excluded Peter from any decision-making or information access. Tucker had highlighted everywhere I needed to sign or initial. He explained each form carefully, even though I just wanted to sign everything and be done. When we finished with the paperwork, Tucker walked me down to Dr. Figueroa's office. She was between patients and had a few minutes to talk. She pulled up my file on her computer and showed me the notes she was adding. The notes flagged Peter as a threat and instructed all staff to refuse him any information or access. She said if Peter tried to contact anyone about my care, they were to call security immediately. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt safe continuing my treatment. I didn't have to worry about Peter sabotaging my care or trying to stop my treatment. That evening, my sister Celine called. She'd heard about the court hearing from Valerie. She said she was taking a leave from her job and coming to stay with me. I tried to tell her she didn't need to do that, but she wasn't listening. She said she'd already talked to her boss and packed her bags. She'd be here in 2 days. When Celine arrived, she had a plan. She'd found a small furnished apartment near the hospital. The lease was in her name only so Peter couldn't find me. We spent the weekend moving my stuff from the house. Celine did most of the heavy lifting while I directed from the couch. I was too tired from chemo to help much. The apartment was small, but it felt safe. Celine set up the bedroom for me and took the couch for herself. She said she'd stay through my remaining chemo sessions. Having her there made everything easier. She drove me to appointments and sat with me during treatments. She made sure I ate even when I didn't want to. She watched terrible reality TV with me when I was too tired to do anything else. I realized how much I'd missed having family around during the hardest parts of treatment. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I was at the apartment with Celine when my phone rang. It was Valerie. She said Peter had just been formally arrested. They'd charged him with 15 counts including grand theft, fraud, and attempted interference with medical care. His bail was set at $200,000. The judge considered him a flight risk given the severity of the charges. Valerie said Brooke had been charged too. She was facing charges as an accomplice to fraud and theft for knowingly benefiting from stolen money. Her bail was lower, but she was still looking at serious prison time if convicted. I asked Valerie what happened next, and she said we wait for the trial date. That same afternoon, I got an email from someone at Peter's law firm. The email said the firm had fired Peter immediately after his arrest. They were opening their own investigation into whether he'd misused client funds or company resources. The firm had issued a public statement distancing themselves from his actions. The statement expressed support for my recovery. Over the next few days, several of Peter's colleagues reached out. They sent emails or called saying they were sorry. They said they hadn't seen the signs of his behavior. Some of them said they'd thought something was off, but didn't know what to do. A few offered to testify if it would help the case. A week later, Valerie called with news about the plea deal. The district attorney's office had offered Peter 12 years in prison if he returned all the stolen money and testified against Brooke's involvement. His new lawyer told him to take it because the evidence against him was too strong to fight. But Peter refused. He actually believed he could win at trial and convince a jury he was the victim. Valerie said this was good news for me because it meant everything would come out in a public trial instead of being hidden in a plea agreement. Every text message, every bank record, every lie would be presented to a jury and reported in the news. Peter's refusal to accept reality was going to expose him completely. The next week, I had my scheduled PET scan to check how the cancer was responding to treatment. I lay still in the machine for 40 minutes while it took images of my entire body. Dr. Figueroa called me into her office 2 days later to go over the results. She pulled up the scans on her computer and showed me the before and after images. The tumors had shrunk significantly, and there was no new growth anywhere. She said the treatment was working better than she'd hoped, and my prognosis was looking really good. She told me the stress reduction from resolving the situation with Peter might have actually helped my recovery, because stress can affect how the body responds to treatment. I started crying right there in her office. For the first time since my diagnosis, I actually believed I might survive this. 3 months passed, and I was sitting in the treatment chair for my last round of chemotherapy. Celine held my hand while the nurse hooked up the IV line. Peter's trial was scheduled to start in 4 weeks, and the court had ordered him to return the stolen money through a payment plan. I was making plans for what came after treatment ended. I wanted to go back to the school and maybe travel somewhere I'd never been. I'd survived cancer, and I'd survived Peter's cruelty. Now I had a future that was finally mine to control. A life where I was safe and supported and free. That's my take on it, but I bet you've got a better one. What would you have done differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading through them, like always.